Hello, everyone. Welcome. You know, we have lots of folks streaming watching, but also flowing into this shared virtual space with us. 130 of us so far. You know that more are coming. I hope that you all had a great couple of hours since the time that we were together last. I hope that in that time, in addition to taking in the workshops and visiting our exhibitors, I hope you found ways to care for yourself, find nourishment and maybe stretch and move and get a breath of fresh air. So we all need that, especially when we're at computers for extended periods of time. You know, folks are still coming in. As you arrive, please introduce yourself again in the chat. I am sure that we have folks who are with us now that maybe weren't with us this afternoon. So I will be happy to share some of those reminders again, and let's just see, you know, who's in this community at this time. Tell us your name, maybe where in the country you're joining from, and your ministry or school or organization. What would you like us to know about you? Wonderful. Okay. Now we're a couple minutes in and some folks are still joining, but as we add those introductions, I will just bring us back to a couple of announcements and reminders for how we can be in virtual community together during this time. So again, we just want to create an environment of technological grace and care. So for Spanish language interpretation, you can click on the little globe at the bottom of your screen, select Spanish, and Lily Alvarez will be interpreting for and with you. This afternoon, we actually won't be using any breakout rooms. Though if you'd like to tell us that you're listening and participating in Spanish, feel free to add that @ symbol in front of your name. Again, thank you to our chat master, Leslie, who just added the instructions in the chat for accessing the Spanish language interpretation. We encourage you to keep your video on as much as you feel able and comfortable. We do have everyone muted right now. And just so that we can, you know, minimize background noise and interruption, but of course, encourage dialogue in the chat. And again, you have the option to go between speaker view to see the primary person speaking as well as gallery view. Another reminder, I'm not sure if I have it in the slide, so I'll say it verbally. Just if you haven't had a chance yet to take a look at our conference participation guidelines, we ask that you take a look at those and honor those in our dialogue. And I know that we'll be adding those to the chat as well. Drew Jernovich, our graphic scriber, is joining us again. So you can find his name, and hopefully, Drew, you have an asterisk in front of your name that might make you a little easier for folks to find when you've arrived, and you can watch how he's depicting our conversation today. And finally, just a reminder that in honoring this community, we ask that you refrain from sharing the Zoom links throughout the conference with either folks who haven't registered or on social media. So thank you. That will help us just protect the space. All right, and final reminder that if you have any questions or need technical help, we have Jeff, who is our tech assistant. You can send him a direct message or send an email to conference@catholicsmobilizing.org. Okay, thanks, Emma. And just want to say one more thank you to our incredible sponsors. We are so grateful for how you have helped to make this event possible. We have a special thank you today to the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and we have a message from them. You can go ahead and play that, Emma. Thank you.
1 minute there, folks. We're gonna reshare. Gotta make sure the sound is great for you all. Okay.
How do we live and share the heart of the BVM mission?
We work together to
Be our best selves.
help others grow, make loving choices.
Be inclusive.
This is the heart of BVM.
Join us. Join us.
Join us. Share our values.
Support our mission.
So much, Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. All right, so in our earlier plenary, we did a chat exercise. We're gonna do another one that's similar, a little bit different. And so this is an exercise called Chatterfall. And so I'll wait for our next slide. Thank you, Emma.
Technical difficulties.
I know it's always a dance. All right, wonderful. Okay, so for this exercise, we're going to invite you to add your responses in the chat to finish a prompt. But the trick is we're going to give you the prompt and we want you to type your answer, but don't press enter until I say so. So only rules are stay curious, dig deep, have fun, don't overthink it. But using the chat, finish each of the following sentences with a short word or phrase, but wait to hit return until I tell you. We'll see who has quick fingers. And then what we can do is we'll see a cascade of responses and we'll take a moment to read each of those. So Emma, do you want to give us our first prompt? So the workshop I attended was, this is our warm-up one. The workshop I attended was type your response, but don't hit enter yet. 1. Okay, go. Whoa. Inspirational, inspiring, insightful, hope instilling, enlightening, important, educational, Catholic social teaching, awesome, enlightening, wow. Riveting, faith-filled, arresting, insightful, fantastic. All right, let's get ready for our next one. Did a great job of not hitting enter. All right, so our next prompt is an exhibitor or participant that I connected with was. Take a moment. An exhibitor or participant I connected with was. And go ahead and press enter. Stewart Center, Father Larry Dowling, Sister Sarah, Mr. Williams, Joel Lightfoot, our friends from COSA, Barry University, Gilead Project, Alan Mobley, Sister Janet Ryan. Wow, I'm so thrilled with the ways that we are connecting with one another inside and outside of these meetings and workshops. Awesome. The Trika Himsa Foundation, the CSJ Sisters. Fantastic. All right. Next slide, please. A new idea I've heard today is, take a moment. A new idea I've heard today is, and go. Press enters. Centering prayer. Lots of folks talking about COSAs. Virtue-based. Inmate-led RJ. Reentry and reintegration. Restorative justice court. Restorative justice with police. Systemic injustice. Amazing. Letting go to let compassion in. Definition of love, giving hope. Wow. You all are going to bring me to tears. That's okay. I'll take it. Forgiving is not forgetting. Compassion. Amazing. Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much. What a way to come back together. So with these connections and learnings fresh, I welcome Monsignor Stuart Swetland to introduce our keynote speakers this afternoon.
So good to be with you. And I'm so excited. And we are in for such a treat. I have 5 people to introduce, and that might seem overwhelming for a keynote at the end of a long day, but this makes sense once you understand why we have these 5 marvelous people together. First, we have Deacon Andy Gromeyer, who is the Chief of Licensing with the Office of Financial Regulation for the state of Florida. And he's a permanent deacon in the Catholic Church, serving the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. And his wife, Kate, who's a business analysis, is a business analyst with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and is author of the book, Forgiving My Daughter's Killer, a true story of loss, faith, and unexpected grace. With them are the McBrides. Julie McBride has been teaching the joy of art for a number of years to children and college students in the Tallahassee, Florida community as an elementary art instructor and now as an adjunct professor. Her husband, Michael, is a senior database administrator contracted with the Florida Department of Transportation. Of course, what brings the 4 of these wonderful people together is what happened in March 2010. The Gromers, their beautiful daughter, Anne, was shot and killed by her boyfriend. The Gromers successfully advocated for restorative justice in the case and shaped the plea arrangement that followed. This is a story which gained national prominence. And of course, the McBrides, their lives were changed forever also in March of 2010 because their 19-year-old son, Connor, took the life of his fiancée, Anne Gromer. But this story is a story that brings the gospel alive to me. I'll mention that in a minute, but I want to introduce the 5th person who will be speaking with you today, Sujatha Balaga, who is a practitioner of restorative justice, most famous as a 2019 MacArthur Fellow. She earned her bachelor's degrees from Harvard and Radcliffe College, her law degree from University of Pennsylvania Law School. She has clerked, she's had 2 federal district court clerkships, and has taught seminars on restorative justice at Berkeley Law School for many years. She's a practicing Buddhist, a long-time Buddhist practitioner, and a leader of lay meditation at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Richmond, California, where she makes her home. She was brought in the restorative justice circle when the Gromers and McBride's case was adjudicated. I said earlier that this story brings the gospel to life. I read it really as a spiritual reading. James chapter 5, 1 John chapter 1, the parables of Jesus, the passion of Jesus, the willingness to forgive and be forgiven. These all came to life. It's not just words on a page. It became to life as I read this narrative and heard this story. And it said to me, 30 years a priest, that the gospel works. I used to joke with my students about this all the time. I'm going to start using this joke again. When there's a problem, I'm going to tell them, try the gospel. It works. Listen to this gospel-based story. Thank you for your attention today.
This is Kate Gromer, and I'm going to begin the story. I just want to let you know that Andy and I are completely ordinary people who found ourselves in a very extraordinary situation. I'm a cradle Catholic, and Andy was born into a Presbyterian family. And so somehow it seemed to make sense that we joined the Methodist Church at some point in our marriage, even though our girls were baptized as Catholics. But in 1999, I felt the need to return to the Catholic Church. And in 2001, Andy followed, becoming a full member of the church that year, along with our daughters being brought into the church, and we began practicing as a family together. We also kind of threw ourselves into the church work and participated in the healing prayer ministry, where it was that we learned a lot about forgiveness. So that kind of brings you up to where we were on March 28th of 2010. That particular Sunday was Palm Sunday that year. And here in Florida, it's very warm. And so Andy and I, after church that morning, were both out in the garden. He plants the flowers and I plant the vegetables. And we came in pretty hot and sweaty. So we were both cleaning up when the doorbell rang. And we went downstairs, and on the other side of the door was a deputy sheriff from the Leon County Sheriff's Office, and a woman who identified herself as the victim's advocate for the Leon County Sheriff's Office. They asked if we were Ann's parents and if they could come in and talk to us. It was then that they told us that Ann had been shot. I honestly couldn't wrap my mind around that. She worked in a baby boutique, and I thought, well, who would rob a baby boutique? That doesn't make any sense at all. And then I realized it was Sunday and it wasn't open on Sundays. And I remembered that she was supposed to be with Connor, her fiance. And so I asked, was she with Connor McBride? And it was the deputy sheriff who told us that it was Connor who had shot Ann. Again, it was just a fact that I couldn't wrap my mind around. I mean, where would Connor have gotten a gun? I know he lived just off campus with other young men attending college. And I thought they must have been playing around and the gun accidentally went off. Well, the sheriff's office said they were there to bring us safely to the hospital. And we knew we would need our car eventually. So we chose to follow them in our own car. And we went upstairs to change. And as we did, I said, we need to pray. So we held hands in our bedroom and we prayed for Ann and the people taking care of her. But we also prayed for Connor because we knew that wherever he was, he needed our prayers as well. We went to the hospital and everything was so confusing. That day was daylight savings time. And so we were confused about what time it actually was. And it seemed like it was forever before the doctor came in with the nurse and told us that Ann had been shot through her right eye with a shotgun. Now, I know enough about shotguns to know that how can you shoot someone through the right eye? Don't the pellets all just scatter? It seemed very confusing to me. And the doctor said she was in grave condition. And I just thought, and he also said it was a miracle that she was alive. I couldn't see the miracle. It became clear very quickly that she would not survive her injuries. And we gathered family and friends together. We were never alone at the hospital. People were with us constantly. We've never felt so loved and supported. Our church friends, our work friends carried us through that week. There were so many prayers, and people would do anything for us. I casually mentioned that I had forgotten to get cat litter for our cats. And when we went home that night, there was 100 pounds of cat litter on our porch. I told Andy if we asked for a new house, somehow a new house would show up for us. Well, it became clear pretty quickly. We talked to the deputy detective from the sheriff's office who told us that Ann and Connor had gotten into an argument and Connor had taken the shotgun and had threatened to kill himself, but in the ensuing argument had shot Ann instead. As I said, as the week progressed, it was clear that Anne would not survive her injuries. And so we made the decision to take her off life support on Friday. Now, if you remember, this happened on Sunday, Palm Sunday. And so Friday was Good Friday. So the night before, during the course of that week, the McBrides had told us that Connor had put me on his waiting list to see him in the Leon County Jail. I wasn't sure why he did that. And I'm not sure why I decided to go, except I have this thing about attendance. And I thought, well, if I'm one of the few people that can go see him, I should go see him. And I asked Andy on Thursday night what he wanted me to tell Connor. And he told me, he said, tell Connor I love him and I forgive him. Now, we had spent a lot of time together that week, but neither of us had spoken to one another about our thoughts on forgiveness. Andy had quite a remarkable experience where he felt that both Anne and Jesus were asking him to forgive Connor. For me, it was more of a remembering of everything I had learned in the healing prayer ministry and how so often forgiveness brings freedom to the forgiver. So I knew I would have to forgive Connor. Michael?
The tragedy began for us as we were over at the beach at the beginning of spring break. My mom, my special needs daughter, and Julie had just started a week at the beach. We were the target and destined so Grandma could buy Katie a baby doll. And my phone rang with a number of private, and I had no idea who would have a number of private, so I didn't answer it. When I found Julie in the store, she was on the phone, mouth open, ashen white. It was a detective from Leon County Sheriff. And she said that Connor had shot his fiance and then turned himself in to Tallahassee police. The detective said that they were having an argument outside our house, and Connor went in, loaded the shotgun with one shell to take his life. But then in the ensuing interaction, Connor shot Anne. We left Target pretty much in shock. Since we had come in 2 cars, I was able to come back to Tallahassee pretty much immediately. As I collected my things, Julie called the detective back, and with great kindness, this lady gave Julie quite a bit of insight in what was going to happen the next few days with Connor and for us. She was a mother of a 19-year-old son, and she had great empathy for Julie. It was the first example of the caring professionals we would encounter in the law enforcement community. As I left for home, Julie was really worried about me because of the state of shock I was in. And she said, I love you and drive safely. And she had the clarity of grace to say, go to the hospital. Once in town, I went to Tallahassee Memorial and up to intensive care. The hall and waiting room were packed. Kate and Andy Gromere were across a sea of people. I felt like a cartoon character shrinking in a place I did not belong. I remember standing against the wall, breathing deeply to try to stem the nausea when a lady walked up to me and said, are you Connor's dad? You look just like him. It turned out that that was Connor's supervisor, and I subsequently found out she went over to Andy and specifically said, there is someone to see you. Andy Gromere made his way across the crowd and hugged me and said something I will never forget. He said, thank you for being here, but please don't be offended if I hate you by the end of the week. All I could say was, I'm so sorry. After some conversation I was in too much shock to hear, I was introduced to Father Michael Foley from Good Shepherd Catholic Church here in Tallahassee. And he prayed for us, not just for Ann Gromere, but for Connor McBride, not just for the Gromeres, but all the families impacted by this tragedy. It was a consummate sign of love and mercy from the community that the McBride family would encounter along this journey. The Holy Week of 2010 was pretty much one of shock for us. We robotically went through what we had to do. Tuesday night, we visited the hospital. The Gromeres, Kate and Andy, were in intensive care, and we were asked if we would like to join them. I remember walking in there, and Andy and I hugged, and together we cried. We cried and hugged for that moment, and the two hearts of two fathers impacted by the same tragedy seemed to bond.
We began Wednesday of that week, finding out how to tread water in the judicial system. We learned how much it would cost to hire a lawyer for Connor, as to do what was described to us as mitigate down from a life sentence. This was also the first day that Connor was out of suicide watch at the Leon County Jail, and we were allowed to visit him. One at a time, behind plexiglass. Over a greasy phone, we talked to a haggard and scared boy who could only ask us how Anne was. He had just found out that she had not immediately died after getting released from suicide watch. We didn't know what to say to him, except that we were and always would be there for him, no matter what was to come. That week, Michael and I visited the hospital each night, and we knew we had to bring Katie. While Katie is special needs, she's not ignorant, but we knew she couldn't understand the depth of what had happened. We told her that Connor had done something very bad to Anne and had hurt Anne. Now Anne was in the hospital and Connor was in jail and had accepted the consequences. We knew that she knew the meaning of bad, of hospitals and consequences. We took Katie up to the hospital and she delivered Anne a get well card that she had made. She held Anne's hand and she sang to her and talked to her, all signs of her unconditional loving heart. Also, these first few days, we received many cards of support from friends, from community figures, and total strangers. A huge community of people stepped up around our family. They prayed for us and supported us. And while we were non-existent in the judicial system, we were supported and cared for by the Tallahassee community. Kate?
So it's now Friday morning, Good Friday morning, and at 9 a.m. I headed for the Leon County Jail. We were going to take Anne off life support once I got to the hospital. And quite honestly, I went to the jail because I didn't want to be the one to tell Connor that Anne had died. I went up to the desk and handed them my driver's license and told them I was there to see Connor McBride. And she looked at the license, she looked at me, she looked at the license, she looked at me, and she said, she said, "Are you the victim's mother?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Can you stand over here?" And I said, "Yes." And a little while later, a uniformed officer came up and she said, "You're on his list, you have your ID, so we're gonna let you go up, but don't pound on the glass." And I said, I'm not here to pound on the glass. So I walked down the hallway, and quite honestly, being that it was Good Friday, I couldn't help but think about Jesus and where he had spent the previous night himself. I didn't know why. Why am I visiting Connor and thinking about Jesus? But that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, was he alone? Was anybody allowed to visit him when he was in jail? So I went up, and as Julie said, there's plexiglass and a phone and a little plastic bucket seat. And I sat down and waited. And soon I saw Connor coming down the hallway. And when he sat down, he was already crying. And he said, "I'm so, so, so sorry." And I said, "Connor, Mr. Gromer wants me to tell you that he loves you and he forgives you." And I said, "Connor, you know I love you and I forgive you." And when I said those words, I meant it. And I have never had to take them back. I've reflected on it in those times that are very difficult, the holidays, and when one of our other daughters got married and Anne wasn't there to celebrate with us. But I come back to the fact that I have forgiven Connor, and the peace that comes with that comes to me even in the midst of my grief. Andy?
So we love and forgive Connor, but is that all we had to do? Maybe, but I felt compelled, and we felt compelled to do something else. I'd always heard that prison was a terrible place, and so outside of Tallahassee, we have a faith-based character prison. I thought if there was any place, if there was supposed to be a nicer prison, maybe this was it. So I started asking around about how we could help Connor be located in a faith-based prison. And they told me that I should talk to a man named Allison DeFore. And I reached out to him and contacted him, and I was telling him about the story, about what happened. And I told him that I was looking for some way to get Connor into the faith-based prison. And he looked right at me and said, Andy, what are you doing? All you Catholics do restorative justice. Why aren't you doing that? Now, at the time, I was in formation to be a deacon in the Catholic Church, and I had no idea what restorative justice was. It kind of stung me a little bit that supposedly all Catholics know about it. And but he, like any good thing, he said, Google it. And so I went home and Googled it. And so I looked it up and found what it was all about. And I thought this was a great idea. And I started doing some research on it. I even wrote a paper for a class on it. I talked to Kate about it, and she was all eager to do it. And Michael, I talked to Michael, and he was eager to do that too, because it gave a chance for us as people that were involved a chance to speak instead of victims in this process. So like anything, I reached out to some places, and honestly, I didn't get a response. I tried Florida, I tried across the country, and it didn't really work out for me. And so like any good thing, you know, there's always somebody in the group that's just going to go out and get it done. And that person is Julie McBride. So Julie?
It's true, Andy. I was looking for someone who could help all of us. And a colleague's daughter-in-law had attended Eastern Mennonite University, and she encouraged me to contact Howard Zier. Howard Zier is known as the grandfather of restorative justice. And he's even written the book, as you see on the screen, The Little Book of Restorative Justice. So I reached out to him and caught him returning home from Germany. And he was thoughtful and he was kind. And he said he would contact 2 restorative justice lawyers he knew, one of whom you'll meet at the end of this panel. Connor's sister, Katie, was 17 at the time, and she was taking a dance class for special needs children. I was waiting in my car for Katie's ballet lesson to finish, and I received a call from Sujata Balaga of Oakland, California. She was calling, I later discovered, to tell me gently that this would never happen, that it had never been done before in a murder case, and certainly not in a state as punitive as Florida. I mentioned that the fathers, Michael and Andy, were having lunch each week, and she said, wait, they're talking? And I said, yes. She said she would agree to talk with Kate and Andy. She said, if they call me and agree to a circle, I will let you know. I called Kate. She immediately called Sujata. And in the space of a ballet lesson, the restorative justice process circle was started with Sujata agreeing to be the facilitator. Kate and Andy? Oh, excuse me, Michael.
Hey, Nanny.
Oh.
It is, but I think Andy's muted.
No, I read myself.
Okay.
Okay, Kate and Andy.
Okay. So the circle, we were working toward a restorative justice circle, and this had not been done in a capital crime pre-adjudication that we were aware of. And so we worked with the state attorney, trying to get him to agree to that. Sujatha was working with Connor and us to try to prepare everybody for the circle. And luckily, the state attorney's father was also the sheriff of the county. So small world sometimes. And so Jack Campbell, the state attorney, agreed that we should have it in the Leon County Jail. And that's where it started one afternoon about 2 o'clock. There was the defense attorney, the state attorney, Kate and I, Julie and Michael, Connor. There was also Father Michael Foley representing the community from Good Shepherd Church, as you heard earlier. And there was also the victims advocate from the state attorney's office was there also. And so one of the key things about the circle was, you know, you can kind of, we set some things out in the middle to represent Anne's life and everything. And we, and one of the things that we asked is Connor not to be shackled when he came in. And so when he came in, he was not shackled. And for the first time in the 14 months that it occurred since his arrest, he got to hug his parents. And to me, that's really quite a wonderful thing about restorative justice. It's just these human touches that we all crave. He was allowed to do that. And so the circle started with us, with them reading the charges, the state attorney reading the charges. And then it came to Kate and I, and we talked about who Anne was and how important it was to her. After that, Connor had his chance to speak. And he has told us since then that speaking to us about what happened to Anne's life that night was the hardest thing he's ever encountered, harder than anything he's ever encountered in prison. So when people say that restorative justice is soft on crime, Connor McBride says absolutely not. It's the worst thing he ever had to do was speak to the victim's parents. After we just talked about how important Anne was to our lives, we afterwards it was very hard listening to what happened, because that was one of the things I wanted out of the restorative justice circle. I wanted to hear what happened, because as a father, I feel like I'm a protector of my daughter and I want to know what happened to her. And so he told us, and it was very difficult. People say that in poems and stuff, your heart breaks, but I can tell you that day that my heart physically felt like it was breaking because it was just senseless. It was just two people who argued and just couldn't stop. And eventually they let their emotions just run completely the gamut and didn't know how to stop it. And Connor told us that he shot her just because he wanted to have it stop. And it's just, it just made no sense. Kate was much smarter. She knew that there wasn't going to be any sense out of this, but she was hoping for a meaningful sentence in this. And she also was hoping for meaningful actions by Connor afterwards. Like she wanted him to speak out about the issues that he faced, about violence and relationships. He wanted him to speak about, to be involved in anger management, to control the anger that he felt. He also wanted him to volunteer where Anne would have volunteered, some of the activities that she was. And that Connor really took that to heart, because he said that Connor asked Kate sometimes that, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do to make, to live these two lives and to make up somewhat for the one that I took? Did you want to add anything to that, Kate?
Yes, just to emphasize that for me, it was about participating in the sentencing for Connor. Quite honestly, we found out early on that the death penalty was off the table, but that he was facing up to life in prison, and that they were recommending, 40 or 60 years. And to me, to have him sit in a jail cell every day for that length of time couldn't possibly make up for the life that Anne was going to live. It made no sense. It would have made more sense to send him to college, have him get a good job, and then send me his paycheck every month. So what I really wanted, as Andy said, was a meaningful sentence. And a meaningful sentence was not a lengthy sentence. It was incorporating things that would help Connor become a good person for when he was released from prison, and then for him to do the good deeds of two people, for himself and then also for Anne. Michael?
Next slide, please. This is how the state of Florida saw Connor. The family of the offender does not exist in the Florida judicial system. Next slide, please. But restorative justice allowed us to participate. It saw Connor as a person of the community. The context of holding the circle as a pre-plea conference allowed the discussion to fit in the existing confines of the Florida judicial system and be unrestricted without consequence to what was discussed. This was especially important to Connor. It freed the discourse to make him deal with the immense reality of what his crime was It made him state what he did to those he most impacted, and then made him hear the enormity of the impact those actions had.
June 22nd, 2011. Kate and Andy and Michael and I arrived at the jail and waited so we could all be processed together. The room was set up with a circle of chairs with the memories and mementos of Anne in the center, so she would be in the process, the focus of the process. And Andy's right. It was the first time in more than a year I was able to hug my son. That day was agonizingly painful. I felt as if the cinder block walls of the jail would crack under the emotion. There was so much emotion and so much honesty and such an opportunity. But the unique impact of restorative justice of the circle was that everyone impacted had the opportunity to speak, even Katie. We shared a short video of Katie, who's 3 years younger than Connor, where she spoke about actions and about outcomes. Katie understood that Connor had done something very bad and that he had consequences. And to Katie, that meant no television, no dessert, and no calling friends. And that's a perfect example of restorative justice. Everyone is harmed in a different way and has a unique view on what needs to be done to repair the situation. Katie in her video talked about jumping with her friend Anne on the trampoline. And her video ends with Katie saying, "Anne is having a wonderful time in heaven." Neither the prosecutor nor the defense attorney had encountered restorative justice before. And as we walked out of the jail, Connor's defense attorney turned to me and said, "I should have charged you more." It's another indication of how stepping out of the normal proceedings is not simple or easy.
In the circle, I said Connor could take the responsibility, but he could not take all the blame. I lost my brother 10 years earlier, right after my dad passed, and I became a very angry man. Unfortunately, my 10-year-old son at the time learned about anger from his dad. The ability of the circle to address such deep-seated harm, for me, greatly enhanced its redemptive benefit.
Another thing the circle highlighted to us was community impact. Our community had lost 2 young people in this one awful act. The young people who helped at Katie's 17th birthday you saw earlier could have gone on to help change the world. And the harm of losing that is immeasurable.
From that first night in intensive care to this day, Andy Gromare never has shown me that hatred. The Gromares and the McBrides gained a rapport of 2 parents that have lost a child. We made a connection between 2 families devastated by the same tragedy. Kate Gromare said that Connor owed them a debt that he could not repay. This is especially poignant to me because I learned the Lord's Prayer, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." Over the years, I've heard the Lord's Prayer said many times, but I had never seen it so profoundly displayed in action as this time. The Gromares showed that their way was to live the words they pray. Julie?
Spring semester a year ago, the Gromares and the McBrides were speaking at a Florida State University Law and Society class when Connor called Kate. She put him on speakerphone, and on the spot, he spoke to the class about restorative justice. And before the call was ended, Connor made this statement.
"The value of Anne's life is worth more than my life in prison." We all work to make the most of this tragedy by speaking and getting involved with restorative practices. Connor has taken to heart the need that he must live the good life for 2 people. Even incarcerated, Connor takes every opportunity to speak and teach on the subjects of restorative justice, anger management, and teen dating violence, the topics that the Gromares specifically brought to his attention. This is a public service announcement that he made showing his commitment to this.
1 second here, folks. We're just going to optimize the sound for you all.
My name is Connor McBride. Teen dating violence occurred in my relationship with my girlfriend, Ann. I was the abuser. I never thought of the relationship as abusive, and I never thought of myself as abusive. But then I hit Ann. I don't know why, I just got angry, just lashed out. And I swore it would never happen again, because I'm not that type of person. But then a couple months later, it happened again. I don't know why she stayed, because a couple weeks after that, it happened again. Finally, one day, I snapped and I shot and I killed Ann. Looking back, I realized that the abuse wasn't just physical. It was also mental and emotional. I would get angry, I would yell, and I would scream just to try to get my way, to try to win an argument. If I was feeling hurt, just to lash out. I never considered myself abusive, but I was. My deepest regret, besides the abuse, was the fact that I never reached out for help. Whether I was too ashamed, or too proud, or too scared to admit what I was doing, I never reached out for help, and I should have. If you're in a relationship that seems out of control, if you feel like you're out of control, if you don't understand why you're doing it, why you're hurting the person you love, or why the person you love is hurting you, seek help. Please, seek help.
No usage, Arthur, please.
I think we were gonna give both of you a moment to close out, but should we do that after I speak? Does that sound better?
Either way.
Okay, why don't I just go ahead?
Okay.
And then I'll turn it back over to both of you, all four of you. So it is true, as Julie described, that I was a bit reticent to get involved initially. My mentor, one of my mentors, heart mentors in this work, Howard Zare, pressed upon me to, at a minimum, speak to Julie. He said she's a wonderful woman, and you can explain to her what your concerns are and why you think that this isn't possible. And so in that first conversation with Julie, just was really trying to explain to her, see, this is what I do. I'm working here in Oakland, California. We're trying to create restorative justice processes for young people who commit felonies in a way that keeps kids of color, primarily that's who gets arrested here, for crimes that we could be circumventing the system with, right? That this is the work I do, and it's face-to-face dialogue and participatory decision-making in which the people who are most directly impacted come up with the outcome of what will help everyone move forward in a good way. And so that to me seemed like an absolute sort of legal impossibility. I couldn't get my brain around how it is that we might actually make this work now that Connor had turned himself in and this was a potential capital crime. And so, but as Julie described so beautifully when she explained that Michael and Andy were meeting weekly, and that, that she had been tasked in this conversation with the four of them of continuing to search for a restorative justice facilitator. I couldn't keep saying no. And then when I spoke with the Gromers, it seemed inevitable that regardless of what it was that would happen. And it was particularly true because my own personal desire was actually to get involved in adult intimate partner and sexual violence work. It's what brought me to the work. I myself am a survivor, and I wish that restorative justice had been available to my family. a family in which we experienced intimate domestic violence, as well as I experienced sexual abuse. And so when there were families that were willing to work together like this and were coming from such a good place of good heart, it felt like I had to figure out something around this. And so it was through several initial conversations, and including that one with Allison DeFore, where the idea came to use the plea conferencing process, which in my past experience, so I was a victim advocate and I worked in domestic violence, and I went to law school thinking that I would become a prosecutor, but then I became a defense attorney. And my intention in being a defense attorney was to defend women who had killed their abusers, but ended up becoming a defense attorney more broadly for 10 years, ultimately working on some capital appeals. And in that process, really, my heart learned that there is no us and them. There is no good guys and bad guys, and that each and every one of us has done harm, and that there are many causes and conditions that give rise to some of us ending up behind bars and some of us not. And so in my own work, I really wanted to find out how we could minimize the impact of systems as well. So there were so many things here in this case, right? The intimate partner violence, these beautiful human beings who'd reached out, and the fact that I had done work on murder cases in the past. So in this conversation with Allison DeFore and others, we thought, how do we use the plea discussion? Like the conversation usually happens between two lawyers where they're sort of going back and forth and saying, oh, it should be first degree murder. Oh no, it should be, it should be second degree. And these are the facts and da-da-da. And they just go back and forth. And it honestly definitely doesn't involve the survivors, the victims' families, but it doesn't often really involve the person who's caused the harm even weighing in on it. So we thought, oh, that's privileged and confidential, the conversations that happen there. That's one of the things I think is most important as a restorative justice facilitator, that we don't create restorative justice processes that brings out information that can later be used in court. That felt really, really important to me, that we don't have really sincere conversations if we're worried that everything we're saying is going to result in longer sentences, or is going to be more about the state deciding what happens instead of the families deciding what happens. And so this felt like the best thing that we could possibly do under these circumstances. And I think the circle has been so beautifully described. And I think you've probably heard a lot about the many people I see from the chat are already involved in restorative justice, but I think it's really important to remember Howard Zehr's 3 questions, right? Who was harmed and what do they need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And how it really just starts with these beautiful and lengthy conversations with Kate and Andy about what did they need now moving forward? What did this process need to look like for them? What mementos of Anne's life should be in the circle? This is what it means to have the process be driven by those who are most directly impacted, right? What does it mean to be in deep, deep conversation with Connor for many months about what does it mean for him to really remember exactly what happened that day, because Andy deserved answers to his questions. And for Connor to do that very, very hard work of digging deeply, and for the whole family to do that kind of incredible work. And to my mind, there were many moving parts of the circle, but the 2 that moved me most deeply were when Michael took responsibility for what it is that he had taught his son. And the other part that moved me so deeply was Kate saying that Connor would have to do the good works of 2 people, because Anne would have done great things with her life. And it wasn't just moving that a mother could hold that loss of that particular trajectory, but that she could task the young man who took her daughter's life with that. Really just a life-changing moment. So many in that circle, so many. And so I think a couple of the things that really struck me too in these in the process was that this notion of Ubuntu, I am because we are, or a person is a person through other people. We really felt that come alive that day. And this notion of interdependence, right? That everyone was so deeply connected in that circle, and that the decisions that came out of that process were really based in these notions of Ubuntu and interdependence. And so some of the challenges for me personally as a restored lawyer, recovering lawyer, is that as a facilitator, I do have to take my lawyer hat off sometimes. There were things I was learning about Connor that if I had been in a legal context, I would have been thinking about that as mitigation evidence or, things of that nature. There were, but, that's not my job. And at other times I had to put my hat back on because we were so deeply embedded in the criminal legal system, which is something I spend, my day job is entirely about how do we circumvent the criminal legal system so that restorative justice can operate in its purest form, which was again an impossibility in this case. And so just really trying to straddle those two lines and allow restorative justice to be the best of what it could be without forgetting that there was this humongous machine called the criminal legal system that was potentially impacting the beauty of what these families wanted to do. But to my mind, it really remains just of the many, many cases that I've done. I've stayed in close touch with everyone in this case. And if I did that with everybody, I would have a humongous family of beloved people. And I wish I could, but this case really just moved me on a number of levels. And it really was, this willingness to just try against the odds to make something different happen, something that everyone deserved, which is what my Indigenous teachers call moving forward in a good way. And just lastly, I'm writing a book about forgiveness right now. I'm writing about my own forgiveness journey, forgiving my father who sexually abused me. And I think it's really important to name that in restorative processes, that to my mind, forgiveness is neither a prerequisite for participation nor a required or an expected outcome. That forgiveness comes when it does at the pace at which those who are ready to let go of their own anger, let it go. That being said, when restorative justice is well done in a sense, right? I can't imagine a better cauldron for cooking up some forgiveness than restorative justice. And again, in this case, really the forgiveness preceded the restorative justice process. And I think it's really, again, important to let people's individual spiritual and internal journeys towards towards forgiveness happen in their own way, with or without restorative justice. I facilitated a case this past Saturday where the young person who had been pretty severely harmed by another person said, that they weren't ready to forgive, but I felt that door open and I felt some level of release happening at that moment. So with that, I just want to give all of you a couple moments, the four of you, just as a brief closing, sort of wrapping up your thoughts on what it is before I think people are moving into question and answer after this.
I just want to say, as someone mentioned earlier, maybe I think Michael, that Connor owed us a debt that he could never repay. And the state of Florida, who prosecuted the case, was not going to repay that debt either. So the whole criminal justice process and incarceration really meant nothing to me. And Connor was offered 20 years, day for day, including the terms of probation that we asked for. And he was offered 25 years, day for day, straight, with no probation afterwards. And, it could be very tempting to take the 25 years, because if he were to break the terms of probation and not just the ones that we set down, he would be sent back to jail for the rest of his term. So I had to believe that if he chose 25 years, that he would still meet the conditions of probation that we set forth. However, after consideration, he did choose 20 years, which will be served day for day. And he also, which included our terms of probation. He can fulfill those before he leaves prison, and He has, as you've seen, made a PSA on teen dating violence. He has taken anger management classes in prison. And while he doesn't volunteer in those areas where Anne would have, because she's really an animal advocate, he does volunteer in the prison and facilitates meetings. And in a lot of ways that satisfies me. I am so incredibly grateful for the Lord leading us both to forgiveness of Connor almost immediately. People call it radical forgiveness. I'm just so thankful for that, and thankful that that led us to the restorative justice process. And the thing that pains me the most is, as I heard earlier today, you know, the traditional criminal justice system keeping the victims in that place of anger, in that place of unforgiveness. I wouldn't be talking to you if I had not forgiven Connor, if I had not gone through the restorative justice process. I don't know that I'd be married to my wonderful husband. I don't know what kind of mother I would be to my other two girls. I had to forgive so that I could move on with my life. And I'm grateful for my life that gave me that lesson to know that that's where I needed to be.
So one of the important parts about this is the impact the circle had on Connor. A lot of people are in prison thinking that they're wronged, that the system is against them. A lot of people go to prison not accepting responsibility, but the circle mandated that. Connor had to step up, take responsibility. And so that allowed Connor to start from a very good position to better his life from that point forward. And that's an essential part of allowing him to come out a contributing member of our community, in that he accepted responsibility and works towards a betterment. So that's significant for the overall community, in that it works to improve the offender. Thank you.
Julie and Deacon Andy, anything from you?
Just real quick, one of the things that I was asked on a TV show one time by the host was that, you know, what did you have to forgive? And I said, you know, unless I did it, I would have gone to prison with Connor and I would have served the same sentence he had. And so forgiveness and reconciliation has allowed me to not go to prison and to live my life, to be a father and to be a spouse, just as Kate said. So I did not want to go to prison myself. And so thank goodness for restorative justice.
I would just have one more closing thought, which is that this hasn't really happened again in this way. This is the singular case I know of that got handled with an external facilitator using the plea conferencing process as the way of coming up with a suggested plea deal that involved the direct voices of those who'd experienced the harm and the parents of the young person who caused the harm. Connor himself did not actually weigh in. He felt that it wasn't his to say what should happen to him. I thought that was quite moving as well in the circle. He surely didn't beg for a short sentence or anything like that, right? He just came to take responsibility and share the facts of what he'd done. So to my mind, this is a real loss for as long as we have a criminal legal system, which I hope is not for very much longer, and that we would have a world of restorative justice instead. For this to become more available when there are homicide cases. And I do hear from families regularly saying, I would prefer restorative justice instead of the criminal legal system. And this has just never happened again. And so I feel that it's really important for us to push for making this available, particularly in this context, in homicide cases, in the plea negotiation process, that this is kind of a no-brainer, that this should be available to every victim's family who asks for it.
I wanted to share an answer to a question: were there other restorative justice circles being done in the sheriff's office? Not to our knowledge. However, Kate and I last year were part of introducing restorative justice to another lawyer and a mother of an African-American man who had mistakenly killed his sister. And we're hoping that the trajectory of that path will be different because they know about restorative justice. And I just want to say, I feel that the trajectory of all of our paths has become so different because of forgiveness and restorative justice and just the Holy Spirit filling in so many spaces within this, all of it. So thank you all. Thank you all for listening to us too.
Julie and Deacon Andy, Kate and Michael, Sujatha, just thank you all. Just so riveting, so inspiring. Every time I hear the story, I remember again just how extraordinary this story is of forgiveness, this journey, and really this witness for all who hear it. So just thank you. There's a lot of questions. They're coming into the chat, and folks want to spend more time kind of getting into the story and gleaning your wisdom. But before we do that, we did say we wanted to take a couple of minutes and have you journal. So earlier today, I mentioned maybe you have a conference journal, maybe you're just taking notes on your device. Whatever you have, a paper in front of you, we're going to ask you to take 4 minutes. And we're going to ask you to reflect together apart on a couple of things. What we're asking is that you share your reactions and your reflections on the talk. Just write some things down, capture some of what's stirring in you. And then we're asking you to take a minute just to think about a pressing question that you might want to ask the speakers. So I'm going to set my clock for now 3.5 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning. But please do take a moment to just allow it to settle in and arrive in all the ways that you need to hear this message. What's your reaction and what's your question? Okay, we have 20 seconds left. We're just writing down any reactions and any question we might have. So we're collecting ourselves before our question and answer portion. Just the last couple of seconds.
Thank you,
Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris Ann, for leading us through that reflective time. It's a good way to just kind of collect ourselves and prepare ourselves. So as you have questions from the chat, please add them. And Emma, I think we can stop sharing screen. Okay, wonderful. Yes, please add your questions to the chat. I know there were a few that we already had going, and wanted to begin with one that arrived. Okay, so one of the early questions that arrived for us was, does the circle help those who are harmed to come to forgiveness before the plea conferencing discusses the sentencing penalty? Not sure who wants to take that one.
Is that to us, Caitlin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you repeat the question one more time, just to make sure I clearly heard it?
This was one of the early questions that came in, and maybe you've already spoken to this a bit, but does the circle help those who are harmed to come to forgiveness before the plea conferencing discusses the sentencing penalty?
For Kate and I, no, it did not help us because we had already forgiven Connor that first week. And so that the answer is no, but I'd probably let someone else speak about who's been involved in more circles than me. Sujatha, maybe?
Sure. I mean, I think that I saw Leonard Rubio's in the chat as well and answered this question, but it's really important to not think that restorative justice is pushing people towards forgiveness, right? It's grace when it occurs. It's beautiful when it occurs, but it is not I think I already said this actually, not an expected outcome or, it was where it played a role in this case was that generally speaking in this level of crimes of severe violence and homicide, it can take up to 18 months to get people to a circle. We didn't have that kind of time because most of the time these kinds of dialogues are happening post-incarceration, like the criminal legal system has done what it's going to do, and then you get to have a dialogue. We were doing something very different. And I felt more at ease going much faster than my teachers would have ever suggested that we do, because these people were all so connected already, and that people, they were visiting Connor in prison. Everyone was breaking bread together. And so that facilitated the speed at which this happened. And even though forgiveness had occurred in advance, I didn't know whether or not some of the details, which Andy and Kate did not know prior to the circle. Forgiveness is something that I needed them to be clear that you might hear stuff that makes you unforgive, and you have to be gentle with yourself if that happens. That's not what happened with these two, right? But that was what was really hard, was holding the whole truth that Connor could tell me, because I was technically a part of the defense team at that point, and so he could tell me everything. And knowing it was going to come out in the circle. So it's really important that we not have prescribed outcomes for processes or say, oh, let's do this plea conferencing, it'll help people forgive. Like, that's not why we do restorative justice. We do restorative justice to move forward in a good way, right? And that is why we do it. That is what peacemaking is. And so that feels really important.
Thank you. There a question for the Gromers and McBrides. Did other family members outside of Connor's sister participate in the restorative justice process? How have your families, extended families maybe, responded to your decisions to pursue restorative justice?
Yeah, we often get questions. Anne was our youngest daughter. She had two older sisters. We spoke to them and offered them the opportunity to participate in the circle. We also offered that to other family members. I know my sister wrote a letter, and it's so funny. I'm pretty sure we read it in the circle. We don't talk about that much. But she did write a letter about the impact of the loss of Anne's life on her. For our other daughters, they grieved in a much different way than we did. They were very young when this happened. And so they both have communicated with Connor, and they both have forgiven them in their own way, but they could not and did not want to participate in the restorative justice circle. So I don't know, Andy, if you want to tell the story about your sister.
Yeah, sure. My sister was in church one Sunday, and they read a passage about forgiveness, and she realized, she felt like God was speaking to her, and she called me up right away and said, you know, Andy, I loved Anne very much, and there were so many memories with her that I really didn't think I could forgive Connor what he did, but I felt like God spoke to me through the scripture, and I forgive him. And it was very powerful message to hear from your family.
I think that was if anybody wants to write it down, it was 2 Corinthians 2. And I think Paul is speaking and says, if anyone has harmed you and you forgive them, then through Christ, I also forgive them. That was the verse that she heard.
Thank you. I have two other questions ready. We have one for Sujatha, and then I'll follow it up. But Sujatha, one person asked, does this process wring you out or leave you depleted as a facilitator? What does self-care look like for you as a facilitator and practitioner?
Thank you very much. So I'm Buddhist, and my day begins with lengthy meditation and prayer, where I really, if I did not do that, I couldn't do the work that I do. Every long-time restorative justice facilitator I know, and everybody doing any kind of work in which there's a possibility of empathy fatigue or empathy burnout. And I don't call it compassion fatigue. I think it's really important to see them differently. I don't think we get fatigued on compassion. Compassion is the wish, may you not suffer. I don't think that I could ever run out of that wish. But when I am sort of suffering with people, the way the Western notion of compassion, to suffer with, that can burn you out. So you have to be really careful to be filling your own well. I can only be a lamp on the path to the degree to which my own lamp is lit. And so I unabashedly center my own healing, my own wellness in this journey. So whatever it is that keeps you certain about your center, keeps you healthy, keeps you well, that needs to happen first. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I don't have answers about what yours looks like, but my oxygen mask is lots of delicious time with my son and my spouse and my beautiful friends and family. It involves protesting, it involves voting, it involves feeling a sense of empowerment in the world. These are many of the things that I do. And so that's you can't do this work if you're not taking care of yourself. That's what I would say about that.
Thank you. And I think many of us on the line would agree, especially with that importance of centering our relationships with one another and with God, and the powers that we believe in. And so I'd like to end with this question, as in the spirit of how do we turn our personal experiences into action that can impact our communities? This question, what can an individual parish do to advocate for and implement restorative justice in the parish and the community? And Kate and Andy and Julie and Michael, I know that this has been a part of your journey too. So will you share a little bit about that?
I'll go first, Caitlin. I would first say learn, come to these conferences, reach out to Catholic Mobilization Network for resources. They got a lot of wonderful things. Caitlin put together a great book on things that I actually use on a regular basis. So thank you, Caitlin, for that. That would be my suggestion, is learn more and find out the resources. And of course, like anything in a parish, talk to your pastor about it.
You know, we talk about restorative justice, but a lot of times it's also restorative practices. And there's so many times when, in almost any situation, I think, how could we use restorative processes, practices to help this situation? And I've always felt that, you know, the way we're going to have restorative justice or restorative practices is by teaching it in the schools, teaching it in our churches, and having our young children grow up. And, you know, I really hate to say it, but, you know, all these lawyers who know nothing about restorative justice, it won't be until we get a new crop of lawyers in who have grown up with this idea of basically what we used to be taught. You know, if someone hurts you, you know, a lot of times we think, oh, Johnny and Bobby got into a fight. Johnny, tell him you're sorry. And you know, just bringing people together. And this is where I think restorative practices make such an impact, is when you can get the young children together and have them express how they feel and talk about it. We know a girl who went to a college in South Carolina, and they use restorative practices for the discipline on campus. So there's so many opportunities. It's not just about justice. It's not, your church doesn't need to, it could start a restorative justice group, work a way to see what's going on in your community and volunteer in that way. But it's also understanding restorative practices means that, you know, in your church community, if there's dissension, if there's disagreement, if people feel harmed, we know that happens. That happens in any group, whether it's a church group or not. If you have this system in place, you know, where everyone comes together, especially in a church group, with that idea of love and compassion, and a process and an understanding of what's going to happen, where everyone will have a turn to talk about how they were affected and how we can move forward as a group, not with someone dictating how things are going to be. Then to me, it you know, if you can have that strong connection in your church, again, it pours out into the community. The number of people who learned about our experience and have come to us and said, you know, that what touches me the most is that they've forgiven family members. Long time, you know, I forgave my mother who abandoned me as a child. This is how that spreads. And that's, you know, it's about spreading the gospel message. So, you know, incorporate it into the structure of your church to deal with disagreements and things that happen there. And the more people learn about it, the more they will carry that out into their community.
Incredible. Thank you so much, all of you. Kate, Sujatha, Deacon Andy, Michael, Julie. What a blessing to share this time with you, to know your story, to know your children. We are so deeply grateful. And with
Kate just said.
Oh,
You're muted.
Oh,
Do I have a moment to add to what Kate just said?
yes.
I'm sorry. What she said is so poignant, and for us, we have realized just raising your hand and asking, why don't we use restorative justice in this case, like we did for the young man who shot his sister? Why don't we use nonviolent communication in the schools? Just raising your hand and asking the question is something we can all do. And that's in every community, whether it's a college community or a middle school community or the community at large. Raising your hand and asking the question is huge. It makes a big difference. Thank you.
And hopefully we can all come away from this conference with new ideas and ability to see those opportunities to raise our hands and say, why not restorative justice here? Thank you, Michael. And so to close out our time together, I want to turn it over to Chrisanne, who's just going to share a few announcements and then transition us into our closing prayer. Thank you, Chrisanne.
Well, thank you all. And even the chat has been just completely riveting. There's been so many great resources there, and such rich wisdom being imparted. So for the speakers, for all of you who were pouring yourselves into this 90 minutes, we just thank you. But a couple of final pieces for, at least for this evening. We still have an incredible session ahead of us with The Prison Within, the film discussion. Leonard Rubio has shared a couple of great resources in the chat. He's with us, and Sujatha mentioned him. He's also speaking at the Prison Within panel tonight, so you're not going to want to miss this. Even if you haven't seen the film, it is worth coming. The conversation is going to be extraordinary. So the film discussion starts at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, so that's in a couple of hours from now. Another reminder that you're going to want to update your profile for the Saturday circle plans. If you haven't already made your decision about circles, please do that. We need to know, and we want to include you if you intend to come. And then for Thursday morning, so the next day we meet is not tomorrow, it's the following day, Thursday, we're going to start at 8 Pacific, 11 Eastern, with a special morning prayer. Julio Escobar from the Diocese of San Francisco is going to lead that prayer, so please join us at that time. And then lastly, you have your journal, you have your notes, you have a heart full, and I'm sure a head swimming. Tell somebody about your experience today. Share it with them. And who will you tell? We want, just like Michael says, we want people to ask, but we also want them to share. So we hope that you'll do that. And we hope you'll join us this evening. Thank you so much, everyone. Great to be with you.
Thank you all.
We will. And
in
the
closing prayer. So Caitlin, you go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Okay, great. So I just want to thank our colleagues, Sister Eileen Riley and Ruth Cunnings, in gratitude for all we've experienced today, pause now for a short time of prayer to send us off for the day. Thank you.
With gratitude for that powerful presentation, we invite the assembled community to a time of prayer, opening our hearts and our lives to the spirit of love and compassion, in whose presence we live and move and have our being. Certainly, we have all felt the stirrings of the Spirit in the eloquent testimony shared during this panel. So let us begin our prayer with a moment of silence to allow the movement of the Spirit to deepen within us and to hold as sacred all that we have just seen and heard and felt.
A reading from the book of Psalms. As the deer longs for streams of water, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, the living God. When can I enter and see the face of God? My tears have been my bread day and night, so they ask me every day, where is your God? Those times I recall as I pour out my soul to the shrine of the Mighty One, to the house of God, amid loud cries of thanksgiving with the multitudes keeping festival. Why are you downcast, my soul? Why do you groan within me? Put your hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my Savior and my God. This is the word of the Lord.
Psalm 32 captures both the human frailty and the divine hope, which dance in a complex rhythm through both the individual moments and the seasons of our lives. We live in a world of harm and healing, of broken relationships and reconciliation, of justice and injustice. In the Christian tradition, we know that Good Friday comes, but it is always followed by Easter Sunday. Death and resurrection form a mysterious pattern until we enter into the fullness of life with God. We offer now in prayer the voices of murder victims' family members from published accounts of their own life experiences of tragedy and grace and their opposition to the death penalty. We invite you to an open heart and to hold their stories before the God of your understanding.
Then Eileen. Okay.
I'm not sure if Sister Eileen is gone. I'll just keep reading. Ava Gale, mother of Catherine Blount. The district attorney assured me that the execution of the man responsible for Catherine's murder would help me heal, and for many years I believed him. But now I know that having someone murdered by the government will not heal my pain. I beg the government not to kill in my name, and more importantly, not to tarnish the memory of my daughter with another senseless killing. And Azim Kamisa, father of Tarek. After my son's murder, I realized there were victims on both ends of the gun. I decided to become an enemy, not of my son's killer, but of the forces that put a young boy on a dark street holding a handgun. I reached out to Tony's grandfather in an act of forgiveness. Ever since our initial encounter, we have worked together to break the epidemic of youth violence through programs that teach children there is an alternative to violence. Tony has helped us deliver this message through letters and messages he sends from prison. That is going to bring a lot more healing than if he had received the death penalty.
Daryl Myers and Naomi White, parents of JoJo. We believe JoJo's killer was not the only one responsible for this horrible crime. We think our entire society bears responsibilities for the social conditions and attitudes that foster such violence. We do not think the execution of JoJo's killer will make the world a better place. To the contrary, we believe that the death penalty reinforces the idea that murder is righteous when it's used by the right people. If we were a truly just society, respected all children in their great diversity, one that offered real opportunity, liberty, and justice for all, our son JoJo would still be with us.
Let us take a final moment of silence in honor of all victims of violence and their loved ones. If you would like, we invite you to enter a request for prayer in the chat room during this time.
We invite you now to join in praying a prayer for the victims of violence. Loving God, you are the author and sustainer of our lives. You know the anguish of the sorrowful. You are attentive to the prayers of the brokenhearted. Hear your people who cry out to you in their need. Strengthen their hope in your lasting goodness. We pray of violence. Draw them to yourself. Let your face shine upon them. May they be greeted with choirs of angels and experience your eternal peace and joy. Be near to all those who have been touched by violence, those who have been hurt, lost their loved ones, or lost their sense of security. Be for them a steady comfort and safe resting place. Soften the hearts and steady the minds of those who would do violence to others. May hate be replaced with love and violence, with peace and darkness with your light. Amen.
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 Thank you, Sister Eileen and Ruth. And we look forward to seeing you all again tonight, hopefully, and on Thursday morning. God's blessings to you all.